And I received confirmation from YouTube that we are live.
Wonderful. So welcome everyone. We are going to officially get started. So welcome to the second meeting of the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change. We're so glad that all of you are here. We are going to do our introductions, our kind of get to know each other stuff today in the chat. So I am sending out a little message here. We would like everybody to chat your name, who you're affiliated with, and a highlight from your holiday season or the winter season if it hasn't been a holiday season for you. But we know that this has been a different holiday season, but we would like to hear from folks how you've been. So if you could chat that this morning, that'd be great. Just a couple quick reminders on the logistics of the Teams platform. Most of the buttons that you need are up in this top right-hand corner. So you can click on those little people. That'll give you a list of who's here today. The next one is a chat feature. We encourage you to leave that open because we encourage you to chat throughout the meeting so that we can all talk to each other and make it feel as much like we're in a real room as possible. There's the hand raise, which you can use to indicate to me or anyone else that you would like to speak, but you're also free to just jump in at any time. That's just fine. And then there's three little dots that say more actions. And one of the things there is that if you want to put a blurry background or some other kind of background behind you, you can. And also you can choose the large gallery view, and that will enable you to see more of your colleagues. So like last time, we encourage you to leave your cameras on. We know it's a little bit sort of tiring to have your camera on, so it's okay to turn it off and take some breaks, but we encourage you to have it on as it helps us kind of get to know each other better and have more dialogue. When you're not speaking, it's helpful to hit that mute button so that we get better sound quality. And I'm sure we'll all speak while we're on mute at some point, and we'll just let you know that. So no worries. Yeah, that never happens, right? And just a real quick, you've all seen the agenda before, but just as a reminder, in just a couple of moments here, Commissioner Bishop will give us a welcome. And then we're going to hear from one of our council members, Ann Mulholland, who's going to talk about a potential focus area for the Advisory Council, building off the conversation that we had at our first meeting. And then we'll hear from Greta Gauthier, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Legislative and Intergovernmental Relations at the Pollution Control Agency, who's going to talk a little bit about the state and both the executive and legislative branch policy development process. And the purpose for that is to give you a little bit of grounding to help potentially prepare you to participate in that process as a part of serving on this council. And then we'll hear from 4 different state agency leaders to talk about their climate policy priorities for 2021 and beyond, and have some chance to do some question answer, some dialogue with them. We'll take a break, and then we'll do the same thing with some of the legislators who are the leaders of the relevant committees at the legislature. So we'll hear some about their climate policy priorities for 2021 and beyond. And then we'll hear again from one of our council members of a discussion of net zero. We'll talk about our next steps and we'll wrap up. So that's our logistics and that's our agenda for today. Any questions or comments about any of that before we get going? All right, well, thanks again to everyone for being here. And again, please, we're going to have time for questions and answers at various points, but please jump in at any time. We want to have a dialogue. We want to have a discussion. We want to make this as engaging as possible. So raise your hand, chat, or jump in at any time. Commissioner Bishop?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so pleased to see the faces and to really convene this group again. So we have a really full agenda, so I won't spend all that much time talking through this. A lot of you have been participating kind of in this in-between time. We've had a couple climate forums where we've discussed different climate issues that are rising, and I did one the other night with Ann. Why am I blanking on your last? Schwagel? Is that right? How do you pronounce it?
It's Schwagel. If it helps, think that it rhymes with bagel.
Oh, well, thank you. And we had a great discussion on greenhouse gas report and emissions, and it was just really helpful to have Ann's input on that from the ag perspective. So huge thanks to Ann for participating in that with us as well. So really want to talk about a number of climate priorities that we're going to be pursuing. So including the Clean Cars Minnesota rule, which is out there now and all of you have heard about, and the clean electricity standard released last week by the governor, as well as our overall administration commitment to clean buildings as well, and what that looks like in the energy efficiency in the building sector, and others that will be released tomorrow in future announcements with the governor's budget that I can't talk to really right now in depth today, but just know that these are all things that we're working on. For the MPCA, we really look forward to continuing our focus on assisting local governments and our tribal partners and tribal governments to build climate resiliency, which was a focus of our 2020 bonding request for climate resilient stormwater grants that we've had. And we also want to continue our focus on supporting electric vehicle adoption in Minnesota through the Clean Cars Minnesota rule, using also our Volkswagen settlement funds for EV infrastructure, and our 2020 bonding request, which was for $12 million for EV infrastructure grants. As well, for MPCA, we're continuing to apply an environmental justice lens to our climate work. And also, since we do manage landfills and have a huge closed landfill program in the state, really addressing those emissions from landfills. We all agree that these priorities are just the start of what is needed to address this existential crisis. And we have a lot of work for climate action in 2022 and beyond. I'm really pleased that we're going to have legislators joining us today that can talk to that, because as we talk about the Next Generation Energy Act, this isn't something that we can do alone as an administration. We have to do it in partnership with our legislators, as well as in partnership with all of you in our communities. I know from my time when I was at Best Buy that we set goals, just like the state has set a goal for the 2007 and the Next Generation Energy Act, but we set sustainability goals and environmental goals, and we tracked our progress towards those. And we were held accountable to them by our customers, our employees, our shareholders, and we delivered on those because of that. Unfortunately, the state of Minnesota right now is not delivering on the goals of the Next Generation Energy Act. We are not on track to meet those goals of 80% reduction by 2050, and the more immediate goals that are in place as well. So to make progress with climate action, we need to conduct a great deal of engagement and listening over this spring and summer to receive feedback from Minnesotans and build that support and coalitions to really push forward on programs. Our customers are our customers, the citizens of Minnesota, really need to understand and help us recognize the importance of achieving these goals. This is particularly important with the U.S. rejoining the Paris Agreement and the need for federal commitments. And soon we'll have, in the fall, there will be a meeting of all the international parties at COP25 in Glasgow, Scotland, again, to relook at the Paris Agreement. And so I think that for us as a state to really be engaged in that conversation, we need to continue to push forward on our progress. We look forward to your help in this process of building our support, our coalitions, partnerships, and receiving your feedback so that we can continue to move ahead this legislative session in 2022 and beyond. These relationships are critical because we know that we don't have all the answers, and we need others to help us move closer so that our aspirations for a just climate become fulfilled. So thank you again to all of you, and I'll kick it back to Mariah.
Thank you. And we have Anne Mulholland up next. Anne?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving me a little time, Commissioner. Great to hear from you. What I wanted to talk a little bit about is a follow-up to our last meeting, where we were all, I think, trying to figure out how we can actually add value as a council. The cabinet has done a lot of really important work in pulling together recommendations and a plan that's really broad and covers a lot of ground that's really important. How can, in fact, this council be helpful? So one of the things we began touching on at our last meeting was a notion of kind of building a broader base around climate change and around this important work. And I've been reflecting a bit about some of my engagement with coalitions over the years. And one of the things that struck me is that this particular topic and this great plan that was kind of put out, or report that was put out by the subcabinet, it's big and it's really broad, and creating a single coalition around something that broad and important and big would be challenging because it's not time bound and it's so many elements to it. So the thinking, my thinking anyway, is that perhaps this council could be helpful in two ways. One, in terms of building a base. One is to really help take this subcabinet report out onto the road across Minnesota, rural, suburban, urban, multi-sector, bipartisan, in a bipartisan way, but take this report out and really socialize it with people across Minnesota. Obviously, that's all, when I say take it out, it would probably be all very virtual in the short term. But the idea is we begin introducing people at a high level to the report, to all the different things that we can do as Minnesotans to contribute to that, those important goals that have been set. So that was one thought that I had, and I'm anxious to get feedback on. The second idea is that those broad introductions are super because they help socialize an important report and get it out there in communities. But the second would be all of us, at least on the council, represent or are part of different constituencies. And so we have an interest, perhaps some of us, in different aspects of this report. And would it make sense for groups of us or small groups of us to come together and perhaps pull together our constituencies around specific elements of the plan? So one thought would be, and fortunately I reached out to them over the weekend, Ann Schwagel, Mike Birkeland, Pat Luneman, and I, for example, all have a pretty big interest in the natural and working lands efforts. And it might be interesting for the four of us to work together, and anyone else that would be interested in this, in pulling together folks from the ag community, folks from the forestry community, to really dive deep into those natural and working lands parts of the report and go deep with our constituencies. So those are my two different thoughts that I think that the council could engage in. I would imagine in terms of those deep dives, we could go deep into energy, those folks that are really passionate about energy, into transportation, climate justice. I think there could be a real deep dives in a whole bunch of different areas. So those are my two thoughts. I blathered on a long time, Mariah, but Mariah, is it okay if we kind of get some feedback from the council, and does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to hear all the council members' reactions if that seems like the kind of scope or focus area or work that the council wants to focus on, or not. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to be sort of the first one to provide reaction. First of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Marco Hernandez. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm the Public Policy Director here at COPAL, Communities Organizing for Latino Power and Action. I really like that, having just worked separate groups of us. Like myself, I'm more focused on climate and environmental justice, and I've been engaging with a lot of people within my constituency and also doing similar work on environmental justice, like Matthew Anderson, Sam Grant from Minnesota 350, and so on and so forth. And so definitely would like that. They have brought to me some concerns, such as not meeting so often, so like every quarter, every 3 months, and they would like for us to meet every once a month, since with the pandemic and the climate crisis, those two go hand in hand. And so I'm gonna just end that right there, because for the rest of the meeting, I have comments about that too. But thank you, Anne. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Marco. That's great. That's great. And I could just see a whole bunch of, really incredible conversations that go a lot deeper. And I would imagine there's several different clusters that would want to convene around some of these topics. And appreciate Lucinda Johnson in the chat said that she'd be interested in being a part of the natural and working lands conversation.
Go ahead, Alex. I think you're on mute, Alex.
So thanks, Anne. I think that was really helpful in terms of getting us focused on a particular approach, and I think it's a really good one. I would be particularly interested in working with folks either on kind of the energy transition side or on transportation electrification issues. And certainly the pandemic makes it difficult to physically meet with people. But on the other hand, it also gives us opportunities in some ways because it's virtual and because we have, the Zoom. It also gives us some more freedom to connect with people that we might have more difficulty connecting with physically because, there's no travel requirements. People sometimes have more time in their schedule. So I think we should take advantage of that to the extent we can, while we're still in this time where in-person meetings are difficult or impossible, but we can in some ways we can reach more people through these various platforms and use that as well.
That is so funny. I feel the same way. I think these platforms are in some respects incredible in terms of how I could just see rural Minnesota gets to participate in things that they've had to drive hours to participate in before, which I think is a real opportunity.
Very fast. Feel free to. Oh, I see Pat's hand up, but feel free just to jump into. Go ahead, Pat.
Thanks for that great idea, Anne. When you suggested to me that we'd consider doing this, it sounds like a lot of fun to me because I used to do some of these dog and pony shows across the state. We might have to do it virtually. Hopefully in time we'll be able to do it in person. But the chance to bring people together that don't normally talk about this, or at least bring it on the agenda, and the other farmer, Ann, and I, coming from a diverse part of agriculture, there are so many groups that I'd like to bring together, and I'm sure we all would, to have the conversation. I would look forward to this endeavor, and maybe when we get into an urban setting, maybe having a farmer like Ann or myself involved there too, because there are a lot of myths that go on that we don't think about on a daily basis. We just think, well, this is the best way. Well, there's obstacles that we have to overcome, and we need to figure out how to reach the end goal. And that's what we all have to work on, is reaching the end goal together.
Great, and I see Wayne has also chatted interest in working maybe with Marco on climate and environmental justice, but also potentially energy transition. So it sounds like this idea is of interest to folks. Other thoughts about where folks might fit in, or if this is the right fit, or what it might look like? Hilda?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's good. I will be happy to join Alexandra in the energy transition and the electrification of transportation, to work with her and to try to bring as much people as possible to this discussion. So I'm happy to join.
Anyone think, not that this has to be our sole focus, but anyone think this is not the right focus, or the council should be focused on something else?
Well, I'll just talk up, I'm sorry, Mike Birkland here, that I think breaking it into categories is really kind of very logical. And I apologize. I don't know if I got back to you on that email or not last week. I thought I did, but okay. All right. Okay, good. I think categorizing it in that sense is certainly a path forward. And, there'll be different perspectives, but I think ultimately the end goal, hopefully will ultimately be, at the top of the list, and then how we go about achieving some of those measures to make things happen, within each sector. I think it's certainly a very viable way to proceed, at least to start out with. So nice suggestion. Thank you, Ann.
And sorry, Mike, I thought I mentioned your name. I apologize.
No, I know you did. I was looking at my emails from last week and I didn't see a reply. So I don't know. Technology, just saying.
One question is what the right division is, because there's a lot of different ways to break these down and probably so much time and effort. And I wonder, I'm just looking at table 1 and the sort of working teams that are already established or supposed to be established amongst the agencies, and wondering how much that looks like the right division and set of groups or not to folks on this team. And there's one, and I'm not sure exactly how to address it. Maybe it's in one of the groups, but interested in some of the sort of regulatory challenges and hurdles around deployment of sort of just thinking about, for example, energy's wind and solar build out and some of the permitting hurdles, but I'm sure that's not the only area where they cross different agencies and different stakeholder interests, where there might be some value in trying to address that, identify those barriers and figure out solutions. Maybe that falls under power generation, or maybe it's something broader.
And that'd be great for folks to weigh in. For those of you who remember from the update to the governor, we have these different teams that are working on sectors: natural and working lands, power generation, transportation. And then we have other teams that are working on engagement and climate communications. So I think it makes a lot of sense for you all to organize around areas that you have connections and expertise and make the most sense for you. So it would be helpful, I think, to flesh out. And Marco mentioned, sort of an equity kind of focus and a climate justice focus. So that, I think, would probably be one of the groups. So if folks want to talk a little bit more about that, then between this meeting and the next one, we can help with some of the kind of coordination and organization of getting folks into groups and figuring out how those groups are going to get started and what they're going to take on. So Anne's got a hand up.
I just wanted to mention that there should be no reason that we silo ourselves, though. The obvious example that comes to mind is that there's a lot of opportunities for clean and renewable energy generation on working lands, especially highly erodible farmlands out of production, and installing solar and wind power obviously are pretty easy peasy examples. So I think, having conversation between these working groups will be critical as kind of we move forward, and seeing if there's a way for us to kind of build some synergy between us.
Other thoughts about what the groupings might be, where you might want to land, or more details about what you think the groups might take on or do. Later in this meeting, you're going to hear about some of the policy priorities from the different state agency leaders as well as legislators, which might create sort of a base of here's a set of things that we want to go out and talk to people about, as well as more broadly, but might create sort of a starting point for discussions. So other thoughts, again, about what the groupings would be, what the groups would do to go out there and build support, what might that look like? What else are you all thinking about? Adi?
Yeah, so I think there was a chain of conversation starting around regulatory challenges to renewable energy projects. So we at Commerce can definitely convene a subgroup. We have thoughts on how to make changes to, say, the certificate of need process or the environmental review process, and reduce some of that time, and or make it more predictable for the developers and utilities. So we'll follow up separately with the subgroup or the members of the advisory council who have expressed an interest here in that.
Thank you, Adi. And Adi is an assistant commissioner at the Department of Commerce, for those of you who don't know him. Any other thoughts about, again, what this work might look like, where you see yourself in it, or other areas that you would like to see the council focus?
I'd jump in with a question, Mariah. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Craig McDonnell, and I serve as an assistant commissioner at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And just want to say that this is really exciting to me. I'm coming from the governmental side, to hear the excitement and enthusiasm you all have to kind of dig deeper and possibly go on the road show, as Anne described it. So my question would be, if we were to operationalize this, what are the tools that you'd need to be successful in something like this? And kind of your vision for what the road show would look like, or some of these deeper dives could be helpful.
Well, I think one thing that we would need is some kind of a synthesis of, because the report is pretty dense and it's big, so some kind of like a presentation around specific areas that we could take off in bite-sized chunks. Although I do really agree with Anne that having, you don't want to silo too much, because you want to give others the opportunity to weigh in. So the other thing that I'm wondering is if we come back to this council with some learnings from these various sector conversations, these deeper dive conversations, that would allow a broader group of folks to really respond to that. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not, but I like the idea of coming back as a full council and sharing what we've learned.
Lucinda?
I really like the idea of perhaps some briefings, so we could make them as short or comprehensive as possible. But if we could schedule briefings on different topics and make them at a time when we're most likely to be able to chime in. I'm an auditory learner, and it helps for me to hear what people are doing and what their findings are. So if maybe we could chop that report up into various subtopics, subdisciplines, and have presentations on the different topics, and that would give people a little bit more information about what they're signing up for, to be helping disseminate and socialize.
Great. So those are definitely things that we can do on our end, help get you all the information and the material that you would need. What are other things that would be helpful on our end to help you operationalize this, or what might it look like on your end? Pat?
I think having basically a PowerPoint presentation, thinking of that as educating, but also planting the seed in people's minds, and then getting feedback. So I think of some of the planning sessions that I've been part of in the past, where you get a big whiteboard and you just start writing down ideas. We need feedback and ideas from leading people within, from Minnesota, all across Minnesota, to try to come up with the best solutions and ideas that people that have their boots on, so to speak, can actually visualize and give us feedback as to what's going to work and how we can get there. Because if we engage them, then we'll empower them if we do that, rather than just speak at them. We need to be engaging and empowering, and then I think we'll make some progress. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Pat. Alex?
I think it would be really helpful if once we get a sense of which people on the advisory council want to work on similar issues, if you could facilitate some smaller group meetings, whether it's over Zoom or some other platform, just so we can actually kind of talk to each other. Right now, this is in some ways too big a group, and the format where I can only see one person on a video at a time, it's just not conducive for conversation and brainstorming. And I think we need sort of smaller groups in a different platform or format to actually do some brainstorming within the smaller groups.
Great. That's something we can do as well. Just a couple thoughts for you all on timeline. You're going to hear later today about some of these policy priorities that we hope will get some traction during the coming legislative session. So there'll be kind of some of that immediate work, and you'll hear some more announcements coming from the state this coming week about those things. Those things will be, happening pretty quick. So thinking about what role you all might be able to play in those immediate things, but also thinking about the timeline to build momentum for the next legislative session, doing some of this engagement and discussion work over the spring and the summer to be ready for next session and beyond. So just throwing that kind of out there into your thinking about what the timing might look like and how we might use small group meetings between these meetings and then these meetings for the full group. We have a couple more minutes on this topic. Other thoughts about what this should look like?
Well, one thing I think might be helpful for all of us to think about as we do some of the work and do some of the brainstorming here is how can we help the state be ready for opportunities that might come from the new Biden administration, particularly if there are either executive orders or actions on an infrastructure bill that Minnesota could be well positioned with some actions to take advantage of. And I think there probably are a lot of ideas at the agencies already. But again, I think to the point that Commissioner Bishop made at the beginning, thinking about how some of those get socialized as really good opportunities for Minnesota, both to continue to be a leader, but also to be positioned to be able to take advantage of those opportunities from the federal government. Not that we need to wait for the federal government, but now that they may be helping on this front, maybe there's an opportunity there.
Chris raises a really good point, and both on kind of sort of regulatory initiatives coming from the federal government, but also grant funding. I think there's going to be a lot of grant funding on energy transition issues, whether it's buildings or transportation or infrastructure. And to the extent that we can be, helpful in either identifying some of those opportunities or working with folks at the state to figure out how to best implement them, I think that would be potentially a really good use of this group.
In our last couple of minutes on this topic, is there anyone on the council who we haven't heard from who wants to weigh in at all on this topic? It sounds like then Frank and Craig and Katie and myself and those of us who help organize will be reaching out to you between meetings then to figure out what exactly are the groups and how to set you up and start thinking about what the work will look like. So we'll have that as a follow-up item from the meeting. Any other thoughts on this topic before we move on? Well, thank you, Anne, for bringing that idea to the group and the folks that you chatted with ahead of time, and to everyone for your interest and energy around working together to build a set of climate actions that will be supported across Minnesota, and that we can make some progress on some climate action. So thank you for everyone for your thinking around that. And now we're gonna bring on Greta Gauthier, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Legislative and Intergovernmental Relations at the Pollution Control Agency. And she's just gonna give us a little overview of the state's budget and policy process so that you can have a little bit of grounding in how your work might fit into the state's process and timelines around these things. For some of you, it may be really familiar. For some of you, it may be totally new. Even for me, who works at these things on the state, there's a lot of timelines, and they're different on the executive branch side from the legislative side. So Greta's going to give us a little overview, and then we'll have a discussion again to try to give you some tools to help you think about how the work that we've just discussed might fit into these timelines and processes. So thanks, Greta.
You're welcome, Mariah, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greta Gauthier, and I'm Assistant Commissioner for Legislative and Intergovernmental Relations at the MPCA. And I'm just going to give a quick overview here, maybe a refresher for folks talking today about the Minnesota legislature right now and the legislative process, and then we'll have time for questions. I should say that by way of background, this is my 22nd legislative session in Minnesota, either working as staff or as a lobbyist or in the executive branch. And I also have worked in Congress and lobbied Congress. Quick overview of the Minnesota legislature. There are 201 members total. That's 134 in the House of Representatives and 67 in the Senate. Each Senate district has two sides that are about equal population. So a Senate district represents about 79,000 voters, and each House district represents about 38,000 voters. And of course, the density of the population is what determines the size of the districts. Here you see a photo from 2019, which I pulled out of the legislative archives because it doesn't look like that anymore when they meet during COVID. There are only maybe 10 people on the floor at a time, but this is the normal routine that hopefully someday soon we will be returning to. So it's for the size of state we have a big legislature. Right now, we have the only divided legislature in the United States. We are the only one that has a different party in control of each house. But the margins are tight. In the Senate, it takes 34 votes to pass a bill, and you can see that the Republican majority is 34 votes with 31 Democrats and 2 independents. In the House, it takes 68 votes to pass a bill, and there are 70 Democrats, 64 Republicans, and then a small group of the Republicans that have formed their own caucus called the New Republicans. So how does the legislative process intertwine or interact with the executive branch? How does the executive branch participate? And for all the bills that the executive branch may put forward, that process starts about 6 to 7 months before the beginning of the legislative session. Usually the minute we finish one legislative session, we begin preparing for the next. So in June of the previous year, the agencies start working to determine what their budget, policy, and potential capital investment or bonding bills would be for the upcoming year. We go back and forth with Minnesota Management and Budget, which is our state's COO agency pretty much, and the governor's office as we flesh out or winnow or remove and firm up our list of agency requests. There's a economic forecast in November. There are 2 economic forecasts a year, November and February. And that always is an opportunity to revisit what we've looked at and to hone what we have. So approval decisions from the governor, usually for policy bills, and that by that I mean bills that have no fiscal impact, is in the fall. But for budget bills, which do have an impact, the decisions on those come down in January. This year, those decisions will be made public tomorrow. So what the governor makes public tomorrow will be put into bill form and move to the legislature. So this slide is kind of an attempt to show you overarching what is the legislative process? How does it work in Minnesota? And there are 4 kind of distinct phases. So there's an organizing phase. New members get acclimated. They're very short floor sessions just to introduce bills and set rules. Committees start to hold hearings, but mostly, background material, excuse me, reports or what they call overviews of agencies. So what is your agency? What do they do? What is their authorizing legislation, etc. The real meat starts to happen, the real work in February and March when the committee hearings kick into high gear. Members are usually in committee hearings all day long from 8 a.m. till usually 6 p.m. or later, and they are debating, listening to, and voting on bills, passing them out of committees. This is also where the public comes in to testify. There are still shorter floor sessions to introduce and process bills. They're passing some bills, but mostly just moving them from committee to committee. This is the time when agencies will present their bills and their budget recommendations that the governor has come out with for their agency. But by the end of March, the policy committees are finishing up their work. And the next phase, well, they always take a break over Easter and Passover, and so that the next phase then begins in early April. And then there are much longer floor sessions, processing many, many more bills. And the policy committees really don't meet. The finance committees, however, the ones that make decisions on spending, they do meet. And each house determines how much money it wants to spend and on what parts of the budget. And then the finance committees assemble a budget according to those priorities or targets. So the House will do their bill and the Senate will do their budget bills, and all those budget bills will move to the floor and they're debated, and those are long debates with many amendments, and then they pass off their respective floors. And then we come to the portion at the end when conference committees are working in May. Long floor session, lots of debate, lots of bills moving, conference committees working out the differences between the House and Senate budget bills, because there always are differences. And what are called global targets are set by the leadership of the Senate and the House and the governor. So they agree on how much will they spend overall, how much will they spend for each of the different parts of the budget, whether it's education, agriculture, commerce, the Department of Natural Resources, transportation, etc. And then the conference committees work hard to get finished, and they pass those bills off the floor, sent to the governor. So in a nutshell, this is kind of how the legislative process in Minnesota flows. What happens in the committees? So we have a lot of committees in Minnesota. The House of Representatives has 30 and the Senate has 29 committees and subcommittees. So bills can be introduced all session long. No bill, they are all in play technically until the end of the second year of the biennium. We have a biennial process, as you probably know, and we do budgeting every odd numbered year. So when the governor's budget recommendations are introduced, those are introduced as bills, and those are for the legislature to move forward, take action on, amend, and go through their process. There are about 4,000 bills in each house introduced per biennium, maybe a little more some years, maybe a little less others. Once the bills are introduced, once they're drafted rather, they are jacketed, which is a process. These are some old-fashioned terms that still persist today, but jacketing is literally a piece of colored paper, yellow in the Senate, green in the House, that the members sign their name in order to author that bill to which that paper is stapled. And then that jacket is put in the hopper, which is actually a metal basket outside the speaker's office or the majority leader's office. And then those bills are taken up, of course, and electronically processed nowadays and introduced onto the full floor where they are referred to committees. So once a bill gets in a committee, this is where the committee chairman's authority comes in, chairperson. They can decide to hear the bill or not hear the bill. If they hear the bill and the bill passes in the committee, the bill is then reviewed to see if it needs to go to another committee, and if so, it is sent to the floor for referral to another committee. Or if it doesn't need to go to any further committees, then the bill is sent to the floor for final passage in a floor vote. Bills can travel to multiple committees in this process, and sometimes very complex bills do need to travel to many committees. It's important to note that even if a bill isn't heard in a legislative session, the first year of a legislative session, it remains alive until the end of the second year of that 2-year session. So how do stakeholders and the public participate? And there are many ways. Again, I dug into the archives for this picture. If we were not in a COVID pandemic right now, or any pandemic, you would be seeing rallies like this almost every day at the Capitol through the legislative session. It is one group or another that come in and rally their supporters to go meet with their legislators. So one of the ways people can be involved is certainly by participating in these rallies at the Capitol. Of course, that won't happen this year, but probably as effective or more is in helping legislators define the problem by sharing your concerns and sharing potential solutions. It's always good when you bring a problem to someone if you can also bring a solution. The public and stakeholders and agencies also help write bill language and may suggest refinements or changes to the bills. It's also important to meet with legislators one-on-one, even if that is in a Zoom or some other kind of remote hearing, because it is at that time that you actually have a moment to get their undivided attention and explain the points, the salient points of your bill. Testifying before committees is also another important way to participate. And when individuals come, regular members of the public who are not affiliated with any one group or who are there on behalf of another a cause, but they aren't employed by that cause, that I think those folks have the most impact when testifying. because they are coming from a different place. They're not at the Capitol every single day. And it's kind of a fresh way to bring a perspective into the process. And of course, there's always the social media and the paper pathway of sending letters and flyers and other types of mailings to legislators. So there's many ways that members of the public or stakeholders can participate and have a real impact on legislation and the process. So 4,000 bills a year, how do they obviously don't pass that many bills into law. There simply is not the time available to do that. So they have deadlines. The legislature sets deadlines for winnowing down the number of bills. So there are 3 usually. And the first deadline, the first 2 are for policy bills, and the last deadline is for bills that actually appropriate or generate or cut, reduce money. So for policy bills, the first deadline, a policy bill must have made it through all the policy committees it needs to visit in one house. It doesn't matter which house you start in, could be the House, could be the Senate. But for example, if you have a bill that needs to go to the Environment Committee and the Climate Committee, and maybe the Commerce Committee before it can go to the floor, you would need to get all 3 of those hearings done and the bill at the floor by the first deadline. This year, the first deadline is March 12th. And the second deadline is that same bill has to get through all the committees it needs in the other house. So for our bill, we'd need to go through the Environment and Climate and Commerce committees in the other house, maybe the Senate this time, by the second deadline. The second deadline is the 26th of March. So as you can see, there's only 2 weeks between the deadlines, which means if you have a bill, it has to be moving in both houses at the same time, especially if it needs to make more than one committee stop. The third deadline is usually in mid to later April, which is when all of the finance bills must be at the final the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the last stop before they go to the floor. So if bills don't meet these deadlines, they're not dead. It just means that they have to go another step, and they get referred to the Rules Committee and have to be passed by the Rules Committee in the House where they didn't meet the deadline. And various legislatures have various affinities for passing bills out of the Rules Committee that didn't meet the deadline. So it kind of depends, but for the most part, people are very averse to missing one of these deadlines. So here's kind of the key dates for this session. As I said, that first and second deadline will be in March. Then they will take their Passover Easter break. The third deadline has not been announced yet, but it'll be coming. And then appropriation bills, the last week is the week leading up to May 17th, and that May 17th is the last day of the session. That is set by the Minnesota State Constitution. So with that, I will wrap up. I know this was a lot of information in a short period of time, but I'm happy to take questions if folks have them.
Could be questions for Greta, or we could open it up for discussion too if you all have thoughts about how that information might relate to the work that you are planning. Hilda.
Hi, Greta. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question regarding how both the House and the Senate it's conformed, like right now. You say this is the only state legislation that is half and half. So what impact does that have in the bills? Is it to move forward any bill, even it doesn't matter who is the GOP or the Democrats proposing the bill? How easy with the way the legislation that the House and the Senate are conformed with now? How difficult is like trying to move things forward?
Yeah, thank you, Hilda. Thank you for that question. It is difficult. The Republicans are in charge of the Minnesota Senate and the Democrats are in charge of the House. The polarized political environment that we live in our country right now is certainly reflected in every state, including Minnesota. So that makes it difficult to pass bills. Obviously, you probably want to look for bills that are the most amenable to both parties, and that sometimes is a difficult area of common ground to find. But I do think that it is possible. Minnesota was the only divided legislature in the last 2 years as well, and important legislation was passed. So both houses have to approve a bill in order for it to go to the governor and be signed. So usually there are things that maybe the Senate wants, and then there are other things that the House wants. And at the end of the day, they compromise. Our system is built on compromise. So they have to compromise and come up with a final group of bills that they can all live with. And then that is what goes to the governor. So that's kind of a oversimplification, but it is much easier to pass a bill when one party or the other is completely in charge. As long as you're in the same party as the ones that are in charge. If you're in the opposite party, then it's more difficult. So at least in our situation now, the House and the governor are lined up together on priorities, and that makes it somewhat easier than if the House was also controlled by the Republicans. I see there's comment. Oh, no.
Yeah, we've got a question from Pat.
Hi, Greta. Good to see you.
Hi, Pat.
Having been involved in the process for many years, you talk about the timeline in the legislature, but I'm thinking about the groundwork that we as individuals and through specific legislators, the timeline that we have to take to actually get a groundswell, to get a bill introduced and passed. And so we're already almost to February, and I'm thinking that if we really wanted to get something done, we needed to be looking at next year or even the year after to get something really organized and in place. So I'd just like to hear your perspective on that as to what you think, what it takes to get a bill introduced and then the support behind it to pass.
That's a great question, Pat, and thank you for asking it. And it's nice to be in a meeting with you. We've worked together in the past. There's all kinds of bills. A lot of bills are one-year bills, but a lot of bills aren't. There are 2-year bills and 3-year bills. I've worked on an 8-year bill, and I've also worked on a 13-year bill at the federal level. I think that it is never too early to start the conversation at the Capitol. And sometimes, very often, bills are introduced to do just that. I know in the next agenda item, you're going to hear from some of the agencies, the types of things that the governor will be moving forward this year. So there may be some things in that list that are of interest and that you feel you want to help get them moved forward. And there may be new things that you're going to come up with in your own process. It probably is a little bit late to get something new introduced this year. However, there is a lot of value if, for example, you have some language or ideas that are fairly well fleshed out and you've garnered some broad support, or at least the beginnings of that. It's sometimes important to have a bill introduced after the second deadline, so in April. And committee chairs will have hearings on those bills because it's a way to start the conversation for the next session. And I would say that might be a really effective tool if you have a better idea in 2 or 3 months, kind of what are the types of things that you want to focus on and you want to move forward.
We're about at time for this section. Any other questions for Greta or thoughts about the presentation? Or anything else from advisory council members before we move on to our next section?
So I'll just chime in on this. This is Laura Bishop. I think, you know, that cycle is part of what contributes to not being able, having everybody, and the churn in the legislature and the administrations is what leads to not having that clear path toward achieving part of what leads to not achieving the state goals. So how we have a long range plan that really works through what it would take to get the state back on track, I think is, or to meet or exceed. And I know we're going to have a discussion about the goal later, but knowing that in the context of where we are on this, I think is a really important piece, is to figure out how we can look at this in a longer term strategy as well. So we can do some immediate things. And that's what we as an administration have been trying to do. And I know that our other organizations and our private sector has been trying to do as well. But what we can change today and then what we can change in the future, I think, is the path that we need to get ourselves on. So thank you very much for all of you for working through that. And thank you, Greta, for that presentation too.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, we're going to move to the next section of our agenda, which are hearing from a number of the state's leaders about their climate policy priorities for 2021 and beyond. To that last point, things that we'll be focusing on in 2021 and beyond. And we've had some moving around the order, but Commissioner Arnold, are you ready to go at this point?
Sure.
Great. And I'm just going to
a short committee, so I'm here.
Speaking of all of those committee timelines, Commissioner Arnold we were moving her around because she was in and out of committee hearings. But I'm just going to remind folks that we have a bit of a tight timeline here. So we're going to hear from 4 different commissioners or assistant commissioners. We're going to ask them each to share for about 5 minutes so that we have about 5 minutes for discussion with them afterwards. So I might be reminding folks about our timeline. But with that, Commissioner Arnold, if you could share with us, thank you for being here today.
Great, thank you, Mariah. So for those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Grace Arnold. I'm the temporary commissioner of the Department of Commerce. So I'm going to focus on a package of bills that were rolled out last week, all unified under a strong goal of moving Minnesota forward on a path to a clean energy future. So these, as I mentioned, these proposals were rolled out publicly last week, and I'll just walk through them right now. So first, we're proposing moving to a standard of 100% carbon-free electricity by the year 2040. So this bill builds on the Walz administration's 100% carbon-free proposal, which was introduced in the 2019 session, to the point about sometimes this is a several-year process. And comes supported by the Power Generation and Buildings Working Group of the Climate Subcabinet. So one change that we've made from the 2019 session is to move the dates a little bit. Recent reports have shown that this is a feasible target, and we're excited to have an incoming administration at the federal level who will be pushing utilities as well. So to achieve the target, the proposal establishes carbon-free electricity intermediate targets. So there's the 100% in 2040, 90% by 2035, 80% by 2030, and 65% by 2025. In addition, the proposal increases the current renewable energy standard to 40% by 2025 and 55% by 2035. So that's the first in the package. The second bill in the package is a reintroduction from last session. That's Clean Energy First. So this bill has already been introduced in the House as House File 10. That means that it's one of the top 10 bills, which was very exciting to see. I'd like to note for this group that there are some issues that still need to be worked on with a variety of stakeholders, and so we're looking forward to some productive conversations this year. The third bill in the package is another reintroduction from last session, picking up on this. Sometimes it's a multiple year process. So this is the Energy Optimization or ECO bill. So Representative Stevenson and Senator Rarick are planning to move on this bill, which makes some changes to the Conservation Improvement Program. I'll actually be testifying in the House Energy Committee on the bill tomorrow. So the final bill, the fourth of the four, is a new idea that's coming out of the work of the Climate Change Subcabinet. That's a statewide goal of a 50% carbon reduction in existing buildings by 2035. One of the things that I'm most excited about this package is that it's a unified package across all of the DFL leadership, so House, Senate, and administration. And we're looking forward to working on those during this session.
Thank you, Commissioner. So questions from advisory council members about those items or thoughts about how it might apply to the advisory council's work? Commissioner, you did a very good job staying on time.
I don't want to mess with your time, Mariah.
I appreciate that. Chris.
Commissioner, it's great to have you present here today. Have you thought about incorporating transportation, electrification and changes as part of that? It just seems like it's a nice fit with the administration's energy goals to be really starting to think more cross-sector and including transportation electrification as part of the agenda. And I know there are probably other transportation proposals coming too, so just curious on your thinking on that.
So it's not part of the package that we rolled out. I think, the joint report that we had with the Pollution Control Agency showed transportation is still a big source of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's certainly a conversation we should be continuing to have.
Any other questions for Commissioner Arnold or thoughts about how the advisory council might engage around those policy items? All right, well, if there aren't any at this time, we might circle back at the end of this discussion with other commissioners to think about how some of these pieces fit together. But next we have Commissioner Sarah Stroman from the Department of Natural Resources.
Great, thank you, Mariah. And it's great to see everyone on this meeting here this afternoon. It's really my pleasure to be here to spend a little bit of time talking about what we're doing related to climate at the DNR. And for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Sarah Stroman, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And I'm going to talk about 4 items that we're working on that really relate to 3 different areas that are the focus of DNR's work. And those 3 areas where our work is really focused are on data and information, and a lot of that comes out of the State Office of Climatology, which is housed at Minnesota DNR. Work around water management, which is obviously a key part of our role and our mission, and then also our work around land management, which is really important given that we manage 5.5 million acres of state land in Minnesota. So the first piece I want to talk about does relate to the data piece, and one of the things that we have initiated is a project to provide access to future climate scenarios in Minnesota through a simple user-friendly web portal. And this web portal is going to be the first time that this locally relevant, so kind of the scaled down climate projection data will be available to the public. And that's really essential for climate adaptation planning in the state, not only at a state level, but for local communities to do that planning. So that project will go live next summer. And so stay tuned for that. We'll be happy to share progress updates on that and give a preview of the portal as that comes into being. The other thing that we've been working on primarily in the area of water management is around enhancing floodplain connectivity and resiliency given more extreme rain events. And specifically, we do a lot of culvert work and water management. And so we're working on a geomorphic approach to culvert design that takes into account not only channel metrics, but floodplain metrics as well, and really is designed to reconnect floodplains. And so this is something that we're working on and working towards implementing also with other land managers. And this also has a great benefit of also enhancing fish habitat by establishing fish passage, where sometimes culverts have broken those links. In the area of land management, one of the things that I think is really exciting is that our land acquisition program has really started to adopt a climate lens. And we acquire about 12,000 acres of land per year. And so through that, we are able to increase carbon sequestration capacity in our forest lands and grasslands. And so one of the things that we can do as we are looking at those acquisition opportunities is really focus on land opportunities that have multiple benefits. So of course, we're always looking for habitat benefits, we're looking for recreation opportunities, but we can also now look for the resilience and adaptive capacity of those land acquisition opportunities to make sure that we are connecting landscapes and facilitating those goals. In the future, one of the things that we are looking to do is to have a method by which we can monitor the carbon storage on those 5.5 million acres of state lands that we manage, so that we can actually manage the climate impacts of different management decisions. So depending whatever management regime we might choose for a grassland or forest landscape, we'll be able to determine the carbon storage impacts of that and help inform our management decisions in that way. And then the last piece I wanted to mention that's related to that is really thinking about how we can enhance the carbon storage and offset greenhouse gas emissions, particularly on forested lands, or thinking about reestablishing tree cover on open lands. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking at is enhancing the capacity of our state forest nursery up at Fedora to make sure that we can grow an increased amount of nursery stock so that we have tree species, conservation grade tree species available for planting on not only state lands, but county lands and private lands as well, and would like to ramp up the incentives we have for private landowners to establish and enhance tree cover. And we've initially set a goal to achieve an additional 5 million tons of greenhouse gas emission offsets by 2025. And so in order to do that, that would take an estimated 12 million seedlings to be planted on both public and private land by that 2025 time period. So that's something else that we're hoping to do.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll just open it up to advisory council members for questions, comments, brainstorms. Lucinda?
Yeah, thanks so much for that information. It's really helpful. I just glanced at my news feed and happened to see that the Biden administration is going to be requesting $10 million from FEMA to protect against natural disasters. And as we know, this is going to be increasingly a big issue for us, not just with respect to flooding, but also fires and other kinds of natural disasters that are intensifying. Is there any thinking about how to improve our predictive capacity, but also thinking about early warning systems and situations where we might better anticipate some of the impacts of these natural disasters?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that's some of what we hope this climate projection data portal will do is with that scaled down data, help communities, better be able to predict where we're going to see issues. I know one of the things that our staff has noted with our flood hazard mitigation program, which is our program to, mitigate flood damage, is that, we have historically sort of known those communities that are prone to flood, and we have done a lot to mitigate those. And some of those mitigations have held, and they've made those communities more resilient. But now we are seeing new communities that never had issues with flooding now having issues because of the changing climate regime and increased precipitation and more pronounced in one shot. So I think exactly to that point is we need to understand where are we seeing those shifts, where are those communities that now maybe have never had flood issues but will in the future, and then how do we put some of those practices into place that we now have good track record on knowing what works because we've done it in other communities, and thinking more proactively about putting those into place.
Thanks.
We have another question from Anne.
Hi, Commissioner. This is just really exciting. Thanks for sharing some of this work. Tell me a little bit about how you're thinking. I'm as excited about the nurseries as I am about the planting itself, because that's certainly an issue that we deal with. How are you thinking of staffing all of this? Because it's a huge and ambitious and important effort with that much planting. And how are you thinking about really monitoring and holding yourself accountable on the sequestration targets? And how can we be helpful is really the bottom line. Be very interested in being helpful.
Those are all really great questions, Anne. And first of all, let me say, we would welcome partnership, particularly on that monitoring of carbon storage. I think there's, still a lot of work being developed in that area. And, we have talked about it, we have committed to it, but we are very early in the stages of figuring out, what the right monitoring formula is for us. And so, that is a place where I will invite other folks who want to help weigh in on that, because obviously, while it's our management, we're all going to benefit from that, right? So that is one area where we would welcome contributions. I think with the nursery, you'll hear more about that initiative coming out and what that's going to take. We've ramped up and downscaled capacity over time. This will be obviously a big thing to get the staff, but we have a pretty efficient operation there. Most of the work comes in the spring and the fall. And we have actually a great regular group of folks that come in for those intense periods to help. So I think, we do believe we can staff up. And then, of course, some of it will be planting on our own land. Some of it will be planting on county lands. And so there will be, folks like county staff that are available. I imagine the soil and water conservation districts that do a lot of that work, particularly with private landowners, will be engaged as well.
Lucinda?
Oh, a quick question. Will the school trust lands, or can the school trust lands be wrapped up and incorporated into this whole program? Sorry, that's the carbon sequestration and planting program.
Yeah, I don't know if we're looking at that, at least initially, for the planting program. It could be. I think we just have to think about what the time horizon is for harvest on the trust lands, which need to keep that in mind.
Any other questions or thoughts about Commissioner Stroman's presentation? All right, again, we might circle back and tie some of these threads together, but thank you, Commissioner Stroman. And next we have Commissioner Tom Peterson from the Department of Agriculture.
Thanks. It's great to join everybody today, and congratulations on your appointment to the this. I think it's such a big issue, and one of the reasons I wanted to be a commissioner was to really try to dig in and work on a lot of these climate issues that I think that there's opportunities in. Unfortunately, COVID, really threw a wrench at us this past year. But I think what's interesting is agencies continue to do a lot of the good work that we have thought, and worked on through this past year. So I'll just go through 4 really big topics that we're working on that we're excited about in our climate work within the agency. One is through our Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program. This is a program we started a couple of years ago, but it's really taken off across where we certified farmers for conservation practices to protect Minnesota waters. We just passed 1,000 farmers and 700,000 certified acres this past week, which was really amazing. For a long time there, for a while, it seemed like we had about 20, 30 farms. But the neat thing about this is that farmers are learning from other farmers. They're seeing that farmers are adopting practices, and then they're doing them. As we started this water quality program, we started to notice other benefits. So integrated pest management, soil health were added as endorsements, and also wildlife, which all comes to climate. Soil health, you're probably very familiar with being a really top issue right now. And so we've added endorsements to the certification that these farmers can earn. And the newest endorsement is a climate endorsement, because as we got working in our water, we were able to start quantifying how many tons of CO2 we were capturing because of these new practices we were putting on these 700,000 acres. How many tons of soil were we saving every year? A lot of these were having impacts. So Governor Walz has set out a goal too, by the end of 2022, the year 2022, to certify 1 million acres. And we're well on our way to doing that. And so that's one program that we're extremely proud of, that is working, and it's growing, and it's having tangible impacts. The next step is something we're also learning through the certification program, is we're exploring payments to farmers for climate benefits. Whether you want to call it a carbon credit or whatever you want to call it, we're working on a pilot scale bridge program with the anticipation of the federal government, whether it's through the Farm Bill or somewhere else, of coming up with a more national solution. We've been working on developing details that's farm size neutral, meaning all types of farms can participate. And that also accounts for actual measurement of carbon sequestration. And we use the Comet Planner, for those of you that are familiar with that, to quantify what we're saving there. And then this is not to be in place of other efforts. There's lots going on right now in this space, but we're really excited about it. But we're, there's just a tremendous opportunity there right now. The third thing is our work on continuous living cover crops, or CLCC as we call it. You may be familiar with the University of Minnesota's Forever Green Initiative, which the department has supported for many times, which really works to develop crops that provide continuous living color to our landscape, such as Kernza, perennial wheat, or camelina, that can be worked into a corn and soybean rotation. And this is really, I feel like we've been this close for a long time on these, but they're really starting to develop. We're starting to see them go into the markets, and now we're looking at scale. Again, the focus of this has been paying special attention on areas where we can protect our drinking water, but it has a huge impact on climate work, as you can imagine. I also just mentioned the marketing opportunities that are coming online, and it's good to see Ann Schwegel here has a really exciting development of a co-op for continuous living cover that she's working on, and we're trying to support. So exciting work there all along. And then finally, I just mentioned biofuels, and looking at how we can use biofuels to cut carbon emissions. And we really feel strongly in that the ethanol industry, especially in Minnesota, the biodiesel industry, is changing rapidly. Ethanol today is not ethanol of 20 years ago or even 3 years ago. the advancements in ethanol and actually in corn production are very encouraging. And so those are some of the main topics that we'll be working on.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Questions, thoughts about that presentation? Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Peterson. I actually wanted to just touch on permitting and, well, I think prime farmland is just one example where it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for farmers to get an additional source of income to help support farming through renewable energy installations, but there have been some challenges in permitting around prime farmland that I think are making it harder, more complicated for developers to site, even where landowners are supportive of those and wanting to sign agreements, to make that land available, and wondering if there's thought at the department about how we could make it easier to be able to do that scale of deployment, because it seems like to get close to our goals, we're going to need a lot more renewable energy in a lot more places.
Thank you, Kevin. And yeah, that is the issue that we worked on. We're charged with protecting our prime farmland and looking at that. And we're also very supportive of solar and wind development. But I think it's a fine line as we try to look at, where we put that. We don't necessarily make new farmland, and so it's like interesting to see. But I think as we look at in everything too, we look at, are we farming the sun? Are there other things that we can use to that? What happens with the tax base? What happens, with decommissioning? And I think that there's a lot of work going on there. We've been working closely with our staff with the Department of Commerce on this. And so hopefully as we go forward and we see more and more pieces going forward, that we can work through this. But we do continue to work through that with our staff, and it's a top priority for us to, try to recognize it. But it also, I'll just be real honest with you, it's a real fine balance as we look at what we have to do out there and how it's coming about. So I thank you for raising that issue, because it's a big issue, because I do see opportunities there for farmers with solar and wind, but it's just figuring it all out is something we'll get to, but it's taken a little time.
Other questions or things that you're thinking about? All right, thank you, Commissioner Peterson. And we have, last but not least, the Department of Transportation, and we have Assistant Commissioner Tim Sexton.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mariah. And thank you to all the members of the council. This is, I think, really an exciting opportunity for state members to participate and work with all of you on this urgent crisis. So, as Mariah mentioned, my name is Tim Sexton. I serve as Assistant Commissioner for Sustainability and Public Health at the Department of Transportation. Commissioner Margaret Anderson Kelleher sends her regrets. She had a conflict that couldn't be avoided, but this is a very important issue for her, and I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that. This is definitely one of her priorities that mirrors the level of priority given to this by Governor Walz. And for MnDOT, I think what's important to note is that we really try our best to be a performance-based organization, which means that our decisions are based on data and performance measurement. And we're trying our best to apply this climate crisis and the need for action on transportation as the #1 source of carbon pollution, really apply that same performance management approach to reducing carbon pollution. And so, I would encourage folks, if you haven't before, we have a sustainability report where we track all of our efforts and look at trends over time as well. And really, I guess I thought today might be useful to quickly review sort of the chronology of our actions as a way to set up the context and share some of the actions that we're taking now and looking towards into the future. And so, starting back in 2017, obviously the Next Generation Energy Act was passed in 2007, but we decided in 2017 that this really needed to be applied to transportation more specifically, and we wanted to adopt those goals. And so we put that into our statewide multimodal transportation plan, which is our high-level policy plan that sort of, gives us the policy goals and framework for all of our agency actions. And then in 2018, we started tracking about 30 sustainability related performance measures to see where we were, how much progress was needed to achieve the goals of the Next Generation Energy Act. And what we found is that, in terms of the transportation sector as the #1 source of carbon pollution in the state, we weren't making a lot of progress. And so we worked with a number of state agencies to do what we call the Pathways to Decarbonizing Transportation Project. And I won't go into too much detail about that, but it's really, we're trying to use that project as the foundation for future work around transportation and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And what that did is, pardon me, we modeled a suite of options to achieve the goals, our state GHG reduction goals. And then we met with Minnesotans around the state, and we got over 1,500 pieces of feedback on the goals and what Minnesotans wanted to be our path forward. And so from that, we heard some key themes emerging that I think are still relevant today. This wrapped up at the end of, or late 2019, but we heard that the climate crisis was urgent and we needed swift action. We heard that people wanted more electric vehicles. They wanted more access to safe and convenient biking and walking infrastructure. They wanted high quality public transportation. They wanted electric buses. They wanted more electric vehicle chargers. Excuse me. That environmental justice and equity should be at the center of climate actions, and that statewide and local solutions need to factor in the different needs in urban and rural contexts. So that solutions, not everything can be applied statewide, and we need to factor in those local conditions. So from those themes and more specific comments, we made 7 recommendations that really I think are the backbone of where we're going on climate action and transportation. The first one is that we should keep engaging with Minnesotans and not just have this be a one-off report or project. And so from that, we created a Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council that has public, private, nonprofit, and community leaders, along with elected officials, who meet regularly to advise the agency on the path forward for reducing transportation carbon pollution. And actually, Chris Clark, we're grateful for his willingness to volunteer to be a co-chair of that effort, who's also a member of your advisory council. That group has a number of recommendations that we're reviewing right now, and I'll mention in just a moment, but for how we should continue to move forward. From Pathways, though, we also heard that we should be coordinating with regional partners around electrification. And so we're engaging with states around the Midwest to develop electric vehicle charging corridors to make it as convenient as possible to travel between states with electric vehicles. Even though people don't tend to travel that often between states, just knowing that you can, or fearing that you cannot do that travel has been a hurdle to some electric vehicle adoption. We heard that we should be providing support for communities, especially in Greater Minnesota and tribal nations who want to adopt clean energy technologies. So we created the first of its kind $2 million a year grant program to support creative solutions in communities around the state to adopt clean energy. There's very few bounds on that. We're in the process of reviewing applications right now, but I can share that there's a lot of creative solutions that are coming from the communities themselves, and we're really excited to announce those awards in about 6 weeks. We heard that we should be offering some sort of rebates or incentives for EVs, and so MnDOT really doesn't have that singular authority. However, we did issue the first of its kind EV incentive for the MnPass, the managed lane system, to allow owners of EVs to have MnPass credits, as a way to encourage users of the MnPass system, but also greater EV adoption. And then we started evaluating greenhouse gas emissions in all of our transportation projects. In terms of collaboration, the report also suggested that Minnesota pursue the clean car standards that PCA has been leading, and also had a series of biofuel recommendations that actually were very similar to a number of the recommendations coming out of the Governor's Biofuel Council. So I just want a couple of final things. One is that the stack that I mentioned, the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council, they've given a number of recommendations to MnDOT that we've taken and we're reviewing right now in terms of our response and our ability to adopt those. But there's some really ambitious goals in their recommendations that include the agency setting a VMT reduction goal for the state, that MnDOT should consider pursuing a clean fuels policy similar to a low carbon fuel standard, which is very similar to one of the high level priority recommendations from the Governor's Biofuel Council. And then a number of other recommendations around electrification, biofuels, and providing more transportation options. So I would be happy to share those responses in the next month after those are released, but we're excited about those. We're also, MnDOT's been leading the Transportation Action Team. You've heard a number of references to the action teams. And what's exciting is that the results are sort of the potential recommended climate actions from the action team are very similar to those from the Biofuel Council and the stack. And so groups are just around the state and within state government are starting to coalesce around some opportunities for transportation that include things like a clean fuels policy, promoting electrification, and opportunities to support advanced biofuels in Minnesota. And I guess finally, you know, I think we're really excited in 2021 to support the governor's climate priorities, which will be released, you know, later this week. But we also have some actions that we're pursuing independently. One is looking at our complete streets policy that dictates how we prioritize infrastructure decisions on our projects. And so instead of, I think in the past, you know, let me say this, there's an opportunity to provide more incentive and investment in biking, walking, and transit. And so one of the policies that, you know, that guides our work is complete streets, and we're looking to update that right now to really prioritize those other modes of transportation as much as possible. We're also looking to update our state's electric vehicle strategic plan. Right now, we have the state's EV vision for Minnesota that was released in 2019. A lot has happened in Minnesota and in the industry since then. And so we're excited about that plan. That work's scheduled to kick off later next month and wrap up in early August. But we're excited that that plan will focus more on heavy duty and medium duty vehicles and how to electrify those. More work on environmental justice, climate justice, and equity. And also be more of a strategic framework with specific actions and some of those measures that I started off this conversation with. And I guess the very last piece is that, you know, Chris Clark, you mentioned the connection between transportation and Department of Commerce, some of those potential opportunities. I think more than anything, in the changing world of transportation, you know, we're recognizing that we need new partnerships and some partnerships that we haven't explored in the past. And so, you know, we're looking forward to more coordination with the Public Utilities Commission, you know, with utilities like Xcel Energy, with the Departments of Commerce, PCA, the Department of Ag, and others, because climate isn't a siloed, you know, it won't be solved with siloed solutions. And so this is new for us, and I think it's really exciting, but it's also you know, poses some challenges. And so that's another reason why I think the input and insight and perspective from all of you in the council is going to be super important as we move forward.
Thank you, Tim. So we have time maybe for just one or two questions or comments on Tim's presentation. Then we're going to go to a brief break as we already have some of our Senate and House members joining us, and a few of them have just a little bit of time to be with us because they have a committee hearing this afternoon. So, Alex.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to hear about all these initiatives over at the Department of Transportation. So, you know, when I think about some of these projects, particularly decarbonization in the transportation sector, is just, it seems so critical to spend money on really visible projects that people see, and particularly people, I would say, in low-income communities and in rural areas, because I think those are probably the communities that feel the most that, like, this is not for them, that electrified transportation is for somebody else. It's not particularly helpful for them. So electric school buses, electric other types of buses, EV chargers, where people can see it all the time, because the more you see this type of new infrastructure and new vehicles, it causes people to ask questions. So I've been driving an electric car for 6 years, and people ask me all sorts of questions and think that that can't be something that they would be able to use because of their circumstances. So you want people to start talking about it and to make sure that, you know, these new projects and new infrastructure isn't hidden. You want it to be as visible as possible, just like a new bridge or a repaired road that people can use and see all the time. So, I mean, that just seems so important to me. And then the other point, and I don't think you touched on it, but just this idea is that coming out of the Biden administration, there's going to be a ton of grant money for states, for communities, for infrastructure, for electrified transportation, and that Minnesota should really be at the forefront of trying to take advantage of it. Obviously, not just the Department of Transportation, but I know that that's going to be an area where there's going to be a federal emphasis on getting a lot of money down to the states.
Here. Yeah, I think those are terrific points, Alex. Thanks for bringing those up. You know, in terms of the Biden administration, we've already heard that incoming Secretary Buttigieg for the U.S. Department of Transportation is throwing out really big numbers for EV chargers. You know, 500,000 plus nationwide, and really trying to support that through other efforts too. And so we're excited about that. And one of the reasons we're working on this plan update now is that we're to help the state prepare, so those investments are both visible and strategic. Because just like we want to profile those success stories, we want to avoid as many of those missteps as possible, especially with some of these newer technologies where an unsuccessful pilot, you know, could also have sort of longer term negative effects. So I think your points are terrific, and I think if there's ways that we can coordinate on those and collaborate, I think I'd look forward to it.
They are, and it frames up what Chris has mentioned earlier about the Biden administration priorities and how we lay out and put our priorities within that context so that they're aware of them, as well as we keep track and can advocate for what we need to. Great.
I'm going to sneak in a few minutes of break for folks. So we're going to break just until 2:50, and then we're going to hear from some of our House members who, again, have just a little bit of time to join us today. So I'll ask folks to come back in just a couple of minutes. If you want to turn your cameras off and take a little stretch break, we encourage you to do that. Also encourage folks to continue to use the chat to continue this conversation on transportation. And we have a couple of our other we can hopefully circle back to later in our conversation, or they can chat some thoughts about what they're working on as well. So let's take a break. Thanks, everybody. All right, we are going to get started again. And I know we have a question from an advisory council member from Wayne Duffy, and we are going to take that in just a bit. We want to hear that question, but we have some time constraints here. So we're going to hear from three House leaders on climate and energy and 2 senators. We're going to give each of you 5 minutes to present some of your legislative climate policy priority issues for 2021 and beyond. And then after that, we'll open it up for discussion. And we recognize that Representative Long and Representative Acom and Representative Swedinsky may have to leave before our discussion, but we'll at least get a chance to hear from each of you for a couple of minutes and then open it up for discussion. So we're going to start with Representative Jamie Long, who is the chair of the House Climate and Finance and Policy Committee. Thank you, Representative Long.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody having us here and the invitation today. This is a terrific group to get a chance to speak to with a lot of amazing experience and background. So really appreciate it. And I'll try to be brief because I know that we have a lot of folks you want to hear from. I just wanted to touch a little bit on what we've been doing in committee so far, a couple of my priorities, and then a couple of requests for ways that we could use your help. So in terms of the committee, we've had 4 introductory committee hearings so far, and we heard some compelling and moving testimony about the impact that climate change is having on Minnesotans today, from farms to businesses to our cities. We also heard from businesses and communities that are acting now on climate change. And one testifier in particular that stood out to me was David Mortensen, the executive chair of the Mortensen Construction, who talked about installing his first wind turbine for Xcel Energy in 1995, and being an early mover in the industry, as we are in so many ways in clean energy in Minnesota, set them up so that now clean energy is their largest business. 30% of their overall business is focused on clean energy. And in the last decade, David said, nearly 50% of the wind that has been installed nationwide has been installed by Minnesota companies because of our early moving leadership. So pretty, I think, exciting example of the possibility of clean energy to create jobs in our state. We also heard the really sobering report from the Walz administration on the greenhouse gas inventory, which I assume you all will be hearing or have already. And we heard from an organization called Energy Innovation on their Minnesota climate model, looking at how we could meet the targets of our Next Generation Energy Act. And I'm going to share the link around, hopefully, for folks if you haven't had a chance to look at that. But it's stark to be able to really meet the challenge and meet the goals that we've set for ourselves as a state. We have to take dramatic action, and we have to do it rapidly and across all sectors. And I think looking at the numbers and looking at what is required to actually meet those goals is pretty eye-opening. So what's the path forward? Well, we are strongly supportive of the governor's clean energy package, which a number of our legislators have worked closely with the governor on to roll out, with Senator Frentz, who's here as well. And we had a public testimony on our 100% clean energy by 2040 bill last Thursday. We're going to be taking that up again this Thursday. We're also going to be passing the ECO bill, energy optimization, or improving our energy efficiency, tomorrow in committee, and are very excited about that. And then we'll be moving forward on Clean Energy First, which I think Senator Senjum is joining here at some point, and that's a bipartisan bill to try to help move towards more renewable energy when we're retiring current assets. So those are some of our priorities that we're focused on in the coming couple of weeks. But I did want to solicit your help on 2 big areas. And one of those is electric vehicles, which Tim set up very well for you in the conversation that we had today. But we heard in our report from the state that transportation is still the #1 sector for greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that with leadership from Xcel and Minnesota Power and Great River Energy and so many of our state's utilities moving towards clean energy, that we have a carbon-free, increasingly carbon-free resource that we can tap to help move our vehicles. And we also know that batteries are getting cheaper and electric vehicles are getting better and better. But we need to help Minnesotans find as many ways as possible to deploy them. And I'm a strong supporter of Governor Walz's efforts on clean cars. Tim mentioned also vehicle rebates, which is something that I've authored along with some of our Senate counterparts to try to help promote electric vehicles in the state and make them more affordable. We've seen that that's worked very well in other states that have done it. Senator Senjum also was instrumental in getting some additional funding in the bonding bill. I'm sure he'll be talking about that. But we need as many ideas as we can, because this is a big transition that we need to make in our transportation sector. And we need to be going as fast as we can and with as many good ideas as possible. And I would love to solicit the input of folks in this meeting for how we can make that happen. And then the second area I'd like to talk about is buildings. We know that buildings usually are 40% of the energy usage in our economy. And Senator Senjum and I were part of a buildings task force that Governor Walz convened. And it was a terrific conversation with a lot of different stakeholders about the future in particular of commercial buildings. And that led to an outcome where the governor has called for reaching net zero new commercial buildings by 2036. And we're hoping to pursue that in the legislature this session, and are grateful that the Department of Labor and Industry is moving forward on the first step in that process with their existing authority. But we need ways to move as quickly as possible to renovate and improve our full building stock from commercial to residential to industrial. And again, I just seek your help in as many good ideas as we can find to helping make that transition possible, whether it's improving our building envelope and energy efficiency to electrifying our heating needs or our water heating in our buildings as well. And so those are two of the areas that I'm focused in particular on, and would really love as many good ideas as we can. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that I would just encourage this group to engage with the public as much as you can to hear input, and I know you are. But as legislators, we're hearing from our constituents all the time that this is a top priority for them. We've seen in poll after poll that climate change is still among the top priorities for Minnesotans and for folks across the country. And so they're urging us to act. We know the need is there. We know the task is a big lift and a big challenge, but I think we've also seen from stories like David Mortenson's and others that there's real opportunity to be had as well if we move forward together and pursue the clean energy economy that we all know is possible. So thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you, Representative Long. And we know that you may not be able to stick around for the discussion. I think there's a caucus meeting. So if you have to hop off, thank you for being here today. And if you're able to stay for the discussion, that'll be great. And now we'll turn it over to.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I have to leave.
Yeah, and we're going to try to get Representative Acom in now before she also has to leave. Representative Acom is the Vice Chair of the House Climate and Energy Finance and Policy Committee and the Chair of the House Climate Caucus. You're on mute, Representative Acom.
Okay, see, I'm just testing you all.
Yeah,
it's a Monday,
right.
so we've got to get back into our, virtual world again. Good afternoon. I'm Representative Patty Acom, and such a pleasure to be here. And I will just say I am proud to serve in a legislature and with a governor that has appointed a climate subcabinet, and I think that's that speaks volumes to how important the issue is, and that there are so many people passionate about it. And so, as was said, I'm Vice Chair of the Climate and Energy Committee, and I'm also Chair in the Minnesota House. We have a Climate Action Caucus, and we have heard from our constituents that this is an issue that's really important, and so we developed the caucus to really come up with ways to address climate change and to do it in a broad way. And so leading into this legislative session, we took time and put together a climate action plan. And it was really multi-sector based on science and forward-looking, ensuring equity, and spent a lot of time just really thinking about the important pieces. We knew that in our climate action plan, we didn't have the strategies, all the strategies that were going to be needed in order to solve the climate crisis. But we wanted to look at ways that would maybe have the biggest impact And so we had strategies in all the sectors, and you can find more information about that at the Minnesota House page. We have a Climate Action Caucus page, and it can give you some information. And I think that that's been great leading into this legislative session. And Representative Long talked a lot about the bills that have been worked on by the administration and members in both the House and Senate, and those are great, and I'm completely supportive of all of those. And we need to be doing much more. The greenhouse gas emissions report came out, and I think that it had some good news, and it also had some bad news. And I think that we see the great things that are happening in the energy sector, and I think we need to build upon those. And we also need to be focusing more strongly on the other sectors. And so with that in mind, back in 2007 in Minnesota, we passed a really important bipartisan piece of legislation. It was the Next Generation Energy Act. So one of the things that I'm working on this session is updating the Next Generation Energy Act. And really, we want to look at, that was based on science that was, 13, 14 years ago, and a lot has changed. And so part of the bill will be updating the science, and we're seeing that we had goals and we aren't necessarily keeping up with those goals. And so we want to find a way to build in some accountability. And we also want to make sure that we're doing it in an equitable way. We know that there are areas within our state that have disproportionate impacts, and communities that have disproportionate impacts from climate change. And we want to make sure that when we're implementing strategies to solve that we're focusing and we're prioritizing those areas and making sure that we're looking at it and rolling things out in an equitable way. And so I think that as we're talking about these strategies, clearly from the greenhouse gas emissions report, we need to be finding ways that we can scale things up quickly. We're doing great things in some of these sectors, but we're just not doing enough. And so in the House, one of our goals is to also make sure that we have a lot of climate champions. And so we want to get a lot of House members carrying bills and legislation that address climate change, because it's going to take all of us working together to solve this really big problem. And so I'm just thrilled to be here today, and thrilled that there's this kind of importance put on this really consequential time and issue. And so glad to be here, glad to be part of the conversation. And as Representative Long had to go, I need to hop off too. I'm sorry I can't be here for more of it, but I'm just thrilled to be here and thrilled for the chance to be able to share some of the things I'm working on.
Thank you so much, Representative Acom. And we're sorry the time didn't work out to have the two representatives stay for discussion, but that's sort of how it is when you're at the legislature. So thank you for being here. And next we have Representative Swedzinski, who is the ranking minority member on the House Climate and Energy Finance and Policy Committee.
Hey everyone, thank you for inviting me to your meeting today. Appreciate some of your work. Yes, our GOP House side, obviously the minority. Our goals are probably a hair different than the majorities, and with some of yours. Our goals are really to focus on some common sense, finding some middle ground on a lot of these bills. Obviously, a lot of members probably have received a lot of emails, and those emails being different across the state. I know a vast majority of the ones that I've received talking about the Clean Car Initiative, the California rule, Governor Walz's ambition to allow out-of-state bureaucrats to control policy here in Minnesota is deeply troubling to a lot of border communities across our state, and it should be concerning to anyone. If you want a bill, pass a bill through the legislature. So our job, I think, and I think most people would appreciate that. If you want something like that, we should be moving it forward, and that's our goal, is to stop it in its tracks if possible. Other issues are, when we're looking at energy generation, we hear over and over in committee that it's renewable energy is the cheapest. Well, then we shouldn't really need to mandate it. And so obviously getting state government out of mandates, pushing away from the iron fist of St. Paul to the rest of the state on how generation should be conducted to businesses across our state. Really empowering, another goal is to empower local cooperatives. Those local cooperatives are locally elected. We really should diminish completely the amount of mandates that are being pushed on our local co-ops and allow those local cooperatives to really set their own local vision for the generation portfolio. And really just pursue all of the above, whether it be natural gas, oil exploration. And I would challenge the folks in this meeting to really look at opportunities that if you truly are looking for Minnesota-made energy, that if we are going to be moving into a battery-operated backup and advancing some of those technologies, rather than look at out-of-nation mines, let's really open up those opportunities in northern Minnesota. Let's look at ways that we can use the God-given natural resources in northern Minnesota of lithium, potentially copper, nickel, and obviously iron mining as well. I think those opportunities we really should be looking as a whole in forward and pushing through as a group. And I would appreciate the governor if he did that. I think pursuing an all above energy policy is probably the best for Minnesotans across the board, keep us competitive on an international market, and also allow the market to work. We've heard Xcel Energy plans on installing over 40,000 acres potentially of solar throughout the state of Minnesota. I believe that we should be very, very strict on the placement of that and protecting of prime farmland. Not only do we need to energize people's homes, but we need to also feed them and field an ever-expanding population across the globe. And it would be an absolute tragedy to allow some of the best farm ground in the nation and probably the world to be put underfoot with solar panels. And I think there's many good ideas out there. I think we should be pursuing those. I think Tom Peterson is on this call with the Department of Agriculture. He's worked on a bit of this issue, but the fall fertilizer rule, there's a map that was put out through that. I think we should be pursuing that map as a proper place to place these solar panels, where maybe light sandy soils, highly permeable, so that not only, if it's your goal to build solar, that we do, but we could also protect groundwater in one swoop as well. So, those are our goals. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Representative, for taking the time to be here. And now we're going to hear from our two senators, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So first we have Senator David Senjum, who is the chair of the Senate Energy and Utilities Finance and Policy Committee.
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today and to offer some thoughts. It talked about committee goals. I'm not sure that this committee or any others within the framework of state government necessarily have goals. Chairpersons may on a personal basis, but I think just generally speaking, goals are to be fair, inclusive, transparent, and do the good work, whatever that might be, in terms of where the committee goes. But more personally, my goal would be to, in a reasonable and sensible way, to advance a clean energy future in Minnesota. I believe that's the trend line for our world, for our country, for our state. There's no question about it. When you get yourself involved in things like the International Renewable Energy Agency and things like that, you realize that the trend for this world is one that revolves around a clean energy future. So we have one Earth. We have hundreds of millions of people that are going to have to occupy it after we leave. I think the history of this world for the next 1,000 years and beyond will be how do we take care of this Earth? How do we sustain it? How can we continue it? And we have an obligation right here in 2021, if not to start that, certainly to make sure that we continue that. So just thinking about the committee and moving forward, we've got bills which are somewhat carryover from last year. Senator Rarick's eco bill, we'll be doing that, I believe, next week. I believe a week from Thursday. That's a little tentative, but that's the goal right now. We'll follow up that bill with my Clean Energy First bill, which we played last year and a little bit before the year before, and see whether we can find a landing strip for that. Hopefully we can do that. Senator Weber has a renewable natural gas bill that we actually passed out of the Senate last year that we'll take up as soon as we get a bill in hand, and he's ready, and I suspect we'll pass that again. There's a clean fuels bill coming forward. I don't know all the details. I've heard a little bit about it. We'll be talking about that in the next couple of weeks, but that sounds like that's going to be in play. Beyond that, we'll have some discussions about community solar gardens, whether, in contiguous county, whether that goes anywhere, we'll find out. We'll let that process work. I think we'll explore things like, our committee doesn't really get a lot of bills, so we tend to be a lot of educational endeavors, and so we'll further explore cost related to renewable energy and how that works. We'll talk about this is just, again, my background, my following this stuff. I do believe that, and the world tells us, I believe that hydrogen is the clean energy future, and so I know Excel's got a project out there. We'd like to know a little bit more about that. We'd certainly like to know a little bit more about battery technology and how that's evolving in Minnesota. So we'll explore those storage techniques. We may well speak a little bit or speak to small nuclear a little bit. Ag and energy we just talked about agriculture and its role in the energy sector. How or if farmers can be more involved in this whole program of growing energy, and could energy be a cash crop for farmers? I think that's an emerging thought, at least. I know this word agrovoltaics is something that is new and I can barely pronounce. We'll talk a bit about the renewable energy, the development fund, and what we spend money on that with this biennium. And then I would just go to your charge as a climate advisory committee, as an advisory council on climate change, rather. And I was just looking at, you are to identify opportunities, barriers to policies and strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase climate resiliency. And then I would just suggest, if you could do this for us, and we talk about barriers, what are the barriers? The barriers will always be, and the rocks in the roads will always be, does it cost too much? If you can solve that cost question for us, that would be good. Is the clean energy future a reliable future? Can you speak to that? And the other one, which constantly kind of emerges, it comes up in conversation, is the whole question about disposal. What about all these car batteries? What about wind turbine blades? Is that a problem? It's certainly, they're all solvable. I know this, but is that something that you can give us some advice on? If you could, I think we'd be the better off for it. So I'll just stop there, and we can have questions if you have any.
Thank you, Senator Senjum. And we'll hear from Senator Nick Friends, who is the ranking minority member of the Senate Energy and Utilities Finance and Policy Committee and chair of the Senate Climate Caucus, and then we'll open it up for discussion with our legislators. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mariah, and let me start by thanking the Advisory Council on Climate Change. Talk about good timing. Thank you for all your work. Thanks for having us all here, and thanks for the work that we're hopefully going to do together. The number one message I'd want to share with you is that Minnesota has to do its share on climate change. I was deeply troubled when we were pulled from the Paris Climate Accords as 19 other industrialized nations stayed in. I do not like the suggestion that we're not doing our share on decarbonization. Take a look at our 2007 emissions goals. We're not near meeting those goals, and those were goals that we agreed to back in 2007. We now know more about the cost of climate change and more about the direction we need to go. I do very much appreciate my colleague, Senator Senjum, for his work, Representative Swadzinski. They both raised the question of cost. We're starting to ask the question about what it costs if we don't take more significant action. Two things happened last week that I'd like to call all of your attention to. First of all, Munich Re, which is an international reinsurer, announced that they had paid storm-related, climate-related damages of over $90 billion in the United States in 2020. Why is that significant? It was almost double what they had paid in 2019. We're starting to see the costs of climate change, and that's the same as the costs that we'll be paying year in and year out if we don't take significant action. But I think my favorite, because I've always been kind of a car guy, is the quote by General Motors, that proud American company, and their CEO addressing climate change. Mary Barra, she said last week, climate change is real, and we want to be part of the solution by putting everyone in an electric vehicle. Not only that, but General Motors changed their logo. So we're seeing a consensus of international opinion that we need to decarbonize, and we can't simply measure it by the cost per ratepayer in the next 90 days. We have to think long term. To those who say the government should not intervene in the marketplace, I would simply say we have considered our ethanol mandate a success. The government says you must blend in corn fuel for the benefit of our farmers and to reduce emissions. That's exactly what Clean Cars is. The government saying we're going to do this to reduce emissions and clean our air. And while I would love to see a legislative agreement on clean cars, I think everyone would acknowledge there's never going to be one in our present makeup. The Pollution Control Agency has done an outstanding job collecting public opinion, and they are regulating pollution. If the Pollution Control Agency can't regulate pollution, I'm not sure what the Department of Transportation, the Department of Agriculture, and all our other agencies are supposed to be regulating. I do push back a tiny bit at the suggestion that if we passed clean cars, we would cede our authority to another state. Keep in mind, there are 14 states, roughly 1 out of 3 in the country, already a part of these same clean car standards, and Nevada and New Mexico are about ready to pass them. What we're doing is saying we'll do our share, but there's an economic benefit to it too. One of the things I'd ask your group to consider is that electric vehicles save money. So if we want to have a robust discussion in the Minnesota legislature, if we want the Advisory Council on Climate Change to really drill down, no pun intended, we want to ask, what does it cost for a Minnesotan to own an electric vehicle? I submit to you it's less. How do you know? Well, companies like General Motors are basically betting everything on the electric car future. As Senator Senjum sometimes says, we want to be out in front of this thing. We do not want to be caught behind. We do not want to have the state not meet its goals. We do not want to fail to take advantage of this revolution. I'm a supporter that we're going to put energy generation on farmers' land. That will provide them a steady income. It will also contribute to the county tax base. Those are good things. One of the biggest things that we have to do, and your question, Mariah, is a good one. How can we help? We have to get the truth out and have it bubble to the surface. The truth is, this is the way the country and the state are going out of necessity, but there's also great opportunity. The electrification of the energy sector is something we as Minnesotans should be proud of. As several speakers have noted, we've reduced the carbon emissions in our energy sector significantly. Hats off to those utilities, munis, co-ops, and everyone else along the line. And I'm with Representative Long about the things we can do to continue. But transportation and industry, including agriculture, that's where we must continue to make progress, and we have to educate the public. Do not be afraid to have these conversations. And I would encourage you at the end of it all to think about this. It's not the conversations that we have with those that agree with us that advance our goals. For me to talk to Representative Long, who's a fantastic guy, I could talk to him for weeks at a time, and we'd agree on everything. But we did not move our efforts forward in one important sense. We did not increase the number of votes. The conversations we want to have are with those people who don't have enough information and those that don't agree. What are we afraid of? We should be allowing the information to flow freely. And the last thing I'd say to my colleague, the beloved senator from Rochester, who I'm very proud to serve as the ranking member on your committee, is I'm asking us to have hearings in the Senate Energy and Utilities Committee on climate change. That's the main issue of our day. We should have that testimony. We should hear and let the public join us in our discussion. And if you ask me, we should have some hearing on the governor's bill. That governor bill that came out this week was 100% clean energy by 2040. If we have a robust hearing, I'm a big believer in the Senate committee process, and I really think that could be something that all Minnesotans could say, good job, Senate. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Mariah. Thank you, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm going to open it up now for advisory council members to ask questions, share thoughts with our senators and our representative while they're here with us for another 15 minutes or so. Who'd like to start us off?
Yeah, I'll start a thought. Thank you so much, representatives and senators on the call. Really appreciate all these informations and all about the bills that you're working on. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marco Hernandez. I do work at Copal. And before I was the public policy director, I was the environmental justice organizer. And so going back, and so I wanted to look deep into the 100% bill. And yes, like we do support it, but there's one thing about the 100% bill that not only myself and our organization, but other EJ organizations like Sierra Club, the BIPOC Table, and others, is that trash incineration is still included as a renewable energy source within the 100% bill. And so a little bit of facts within that is that Minnesota has the third highest number of municipal solid waste incinerators in the United States, with 7 incinerators. And the cost of burning trash in municipal incinerators are significant to human and ecological health and expensive for community members and municipalities. And so these incinerators are large emitters of toxic air pollutants that are detrimental to human health, and burning consumer waste emits many toxins such as heavy metals, dioxins, lead, mercury, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter. And so people living close to these facilities are exposed through inhalation or through contaminated food and water. And these toxins are linked to a variety of problems, including asthma, heart disease, miscarriage, stillbirth, kidney disease, high blood pressure, and lung disease. Notably, long-term exposures to particulate matter has been shown to increase the risk of death from COVID-19. So, which I'm a little bit disappointed that there hasn't been a moratorium during this pandemic. And so, which notably explains why there is a higher rate of COVID within BIPOC and frontline communities, looking at the HERC, for example. And then also, in addition to paying more for healthcare due to a higher pollution burden, residents in Minnesota may also pay more to have waste burned instead of landfilled. And the U.S. Energy Information Administration reports that burning trash and incinerators is the most expensive way to make energy. And also wanted to make the note that how is burning trash renewable energy? And I'm not here to be a supporter of landfills as well. And the purpose of this Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change is to come up with solutions, and some of them may be bold. And so really talking about zero waste legislation and being an example to the rest of the country that we can't have, especially the MPCA, divert trash from the landfills to incinerators now, because that cannot and should not be the solution for Minnesotans. And I want to urge the governor to stop the support of the language being put in the 100% bill as well. And so that's the end of the thought.
Thank you, Marco. Thoughts on what Marco has shared, or anything that our senators or representatives have shared?
I would just say, and I would invite, and I'm really serious about this, Marco. Anytime you want to come to Rochester and tour with me the Olmsted County Waste to Energy Facility, I would be more than anxious to invite you and to go with you. And that said sincerely, there is a trade-off. As you pointed out, we're a society that does accumulate trash. What are we going to do with it? I will tell you, as bonding chair, I am one of the most painful additions to a bonding bill that I've ever written in. I've written in a lot of times. Is to spend 10 million here, 20 million here. We've got 120 million out at Burnsville, which we have yet to spend, probably be in the next bonding bill, to dig up a waste trash site and clean it up. We have these sites all over Minnesota. We've got to call a great big timeout on burying waste at some point in time, because that has an enormous cost as well as certainly environmental concerns. So is the environmental concern water quality as it relates to a landfill, or is it air quality as it relates to a waste energy incinerator, which, by the way, operate fully at all state and federal regulations, dry scrubbers, electrostatic precipitators, the particulates, the heavy metals, and so on are are scrubbed out nearly to zero, well below, at least in Olmsted County, well below federal levels. So it is a balance. And by the way, energy is just a byproduct of that. We heat and cool 40 buildings in downtown Rochester, the Civic Center, the government buildings, the libraries, and a number of other facilities with steam coming off that waste energy facility that would have not been generated had it not been for the waste. Electricity is, we spin turbines on the way, create a little electricity there, sell it on the market. It helps pay for the operation. So I happen to think it's a model operation. I happen to think quite differently than you in terms of this kind of an operation. We are, until we decide as a society not to create waste, we're going to have a way to treat it, to handle it. And at least where I live, the waste to energy facility is well regarded, well accepted. I don't think the Olmsted County would turn their back on that in 100 years. So I'll just leave it at that. But again, open invitation anytime, Marco. Would love to have you down there and love to get to know you a little bit better.
Mariah, I would love to jump in for just a second if there's still time.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Marco. You raised two important issues. One is the technology that allows this to be categorized in the governor's bill as clean energy. And I think that's a worthy debate, and you've entered into it here. And both you and Senator Senja make good points. Landfills are a part of the discussion of when we incinerate trash. But my point is, you've raised a legitimate issue on the first part. On the second part, you win by knockout. The placement for fairness and justice and equity of places like the HERC has to be done differently. And so I think whether we agree or disagree about the efficacy of the current technology, and it's included in the bill, and I plan to be an author, I think you make an excellent point, which is in the same way we have to do our fair share as Minnesotans, the burdens of the placement of those places has to be fair. It cannot simply be placed in a community because there are communities of color or lower income. So you win that round on that part of it.
Thank you. We've got Wayne, you raised your hand quite some time ago. I don't know if you have a question or something that you'd like to share now, but I want to give you the opportunity. And if you want us to circle back to you, Wayne, we can do that.
No, that must be, I'm sorry, I must have hit the wrong button.
Oh, no problem. I think it was a while back too, but okay. And then Alex.
Senators and representatives, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm Alex Klass. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, focusing on energy and natural resources law issues. So on the electric transportation side, I think the Pollution Control Agency clean car rules are critically important just to make more electric vehicles available to consumers. But is the legislature considering at all any sort of a new kind of cash for clunkers program to get people, particularly lower income folks who don't buy new cars very often, to turn in, their older cars and then be able to get money towards a new electric vehicle? Because we need people to buy the cars as well, and not everybody buys a new car very often. So I'm wondering if there's any legislative, or maybe some of the regulators on the phone can talk about regulatory efforts. But I'm also interested as to whether that's an idea that's floating around the legislature at all.
I don't believe it's in any Senate bill that I've heard of yet. So I've not heard of anything.
Is it something that you think might be a good idea?
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, if there's a lot of pressure for $1 in the legislature, a lot of human services needs and initiatives out there that always seem to kind of trump this kind of thing. And is it a good idea? Sure. Is it better to do cash for clunkers or help with some housing needs for people that don't have homes? That's in the eyes of the beholder. The answer to that question. So those are the struggles that we have. There's limited resources. We've got to put them to where the best or greatest need is. Typically, they tend to go into human services, and probably ought to.
Thank you, Alex, for the question. I agree with Senator Senjum. At the state level, we have to have a balanced budget, which is both the best part of the budgeting process, but also the toughest. If we want to spend $50 million on cash for clunkers, we can do that. But we'll have to persuade a majority of the House and Senate that that's a better use than any other use for $50 million. I would say I've heard a lot in the last week from the federal representatives that discussion of cash for clunkers is at least percolating, and you may recall that's where it came from the last time.
I will say I just gave a car not too long ago to something. It was a 2000 Cadillac, and I got a $500 deduction. So, you know, I guess to some extent that's cash from the federal government.
Great. We've got Mike Berglund next.
Thank you. And thank you, senators and representatives for being on the call here or the Zoom meeting here today. Just wanted to place a reminder that certainly when we talk about just opportunities for natural solutions, growing trees and harvesting trees and sequestering carbon in trees is certainly a message that we align with others on this council. And then certainly the storage long term in products is beneficial for all of us, especially on cool winter days like today. Another opportunity really from a state perspective, and when it comes to thinking about incentives, whether it be on the ground or in heating alternatives, is really forest-based biomass. And residuals continue to be a problem in Minnesota, where we just continue to stockpile sawdust and shavings and parts of a tree that are just that we're not able to utilize in the manufacturing process. So it's always worth just kind of making sure that that's part of the equation or part of the consideration going forward. And we'd ask you to think about that as you consider options and solutions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Clark.
Thanks for the presentation today. It won't surprise you that I have a lot of thoughts to share with you about both the bills specifically, but also the energy transition that we're on. But for purposes of today, I think just a couple of things that I think would be good to share with both of you and any of the other speakers. I think the others had to leave to get back to hearings, but the cross-sector work is really an opportunity that I think this climate sub-cabinet and the governor's agencies are doing well in identifying places where we can make a difference. And I think having legislative support for that cross-sector, cross-functional work would be helpful. Each of the agencies has their statutory framework, and they're doing well to work across those boundaries to be as thoughtful as they can about what we can accomplish. But I think if the legislature would encourage that type of interaction even more, it would be helpful and would be consistent with what Governor Walz is trying to do with these legislative initiatives. I also think Minnesota has a strong history of using incentives along with the mandates. And regardless of where you are on the mandates, you can see benefits that come from the work Minnesota has done in being a leader and in its use of incentives, particularly on the conservation sector. And there are opportunities to think maybe outside of the general budget process for ways to fund some of this work. So I just outline those. I also think as we work in the intersection between energy, transportation, and ag, Minnesota is uniquely positioned to really lead. And that's why it's interesting to hear about these new legislative proposals, but I think even more interesting is the opportunity to work across sectors and show opportunity for all sorts of Minnesota businesses, including the ag sector, but also including that spirit of innovation that we have at many of our Minnesota companies. So I think there's a very good, a very bipartisan story that can be found for this. So I'd just put that out there in the spirit of bridging polar divides and in a time of celebrating that we have the nation's only split legislature, I guess.
Can I just jump in because Chris has just sort of motivated me to say a couple. Yeah, I think as we go through this energy transition, if we just think in terms of the kilowatt or the conservation, we're missing out. I think there's innovation to be had here, and I go back a couple of years ago. President Obama had the 2% medical device tax, and I was going to be real smart on the tax committee and say, if Minnesota pays this, we'll keep our companies here. In fact, we'll even attract more companies. Well, I come to find out Minnesota is already 25% of the medical device industry in the United States of America. 25%, and why not we also be 25% of the clean energy device innovative future that we might cultivate if in fact we step forward in this area. I think we've got a critical mass certainly of scientists. We've got the University of Minnesota. We're all set up. If we can just kind of weave the fabric a little bit, maybe we can get something out of here well beyond just clean energy. Maybe we can get an economy that perhaps somewhat even equals a medical device industry. So again, you got to dare to dream. That's my dream for today.
Well, Chris, if you'd like a bipartisan comment, here it is. Senator Senjum, nothing would make me happier than to see our state become that type of leader in renewable energy and in the technology and innovation. I think that'd be fantastic. I'm hoping that our state government and our leaders will send a message to the rest of the country and the world that we are that state. And I think some of the bills we're talking about here can send that type of message, like clean cars. But thank you, Chris.
I'll just, we have Medical Alley. Why can't we have Energy Alley?
A new charge for the advisory council. We have another question from Dave Sunderman.
Yeah, I represent or I'm part of the cooperatives on the utility side. And earlier we talked about 100% clean energy standard bill coming out of the House side. And just talking about utilities in general, we've made a lot of progress, especially over the last few years. And the part I think of question is always 100%. You can get up to, a lot of different percentages fairly easy, so to speak. But when you get into that last, 10%, very difficult and under certain time constraints. And if there's flexibility built in for natural gas peakers and different types of things to take us through those very small periods of time, like when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, etc. Those are things that people can rally behind and make a big difference and move the needle. So I just want to put that out there that to do 100% of anything is extremely difficult.
Well, since you mentioned the governor's bill, Mr. Sunderman, I hope you don't mind me jumping in to reassure you about the content of the bill. And full disclosure, I live in North Mankato and I'm a happy, satisfied customer of Benco, of which Mr. Sunderman is the managing director. So these comments would be the same regardless of where I lived. The bill has an off-ramp. And so what the bill says is that the Public Utilities Commission, if faced with a reliability or cost obstacle, can grant a resource plan to Minnesota Power, XL, Great River, whatever it is, to deviate from the 100%. And I would agree with you also, Dave, we are not there. We could not do 100% with full reliability today. It is our hope, though, that we can follow the lead of XL, which says, as you know, they'll be 100% carbon-free by 2050, and make that a signal to the marketplace and to our beloved co-ops that we will head there together. And if it proves that we can't, I'm guessing you'll see some hardworking, talented utility representatives mention the off-ramp that's in the bill and say, this is the off-ramp and we'd like you to let us take it. And I hope our Public Utilities Commission would be good listeners. We're asking for a little bit of a leap of faith. We can't really fly airplanes on electricity right now, and I bet Americans would be pretty quick to say they won't give up their airplane travel. I know Mrs. Frentz wouldn't like to give it up, but that's a different Zoom meeting. Anyway, thank you.
Mike Kirkland.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would just kind of reiterate Dave Sunderman's comments and also just kind of state too, while we've got this change, the pace of change is massive and the transition is significant. And we do have mills in Minnesota that, you know, from a competitive standpoint, input costs are very important, large job providers. So we talk about off-ramps in the utility sector, but it provides also the opportunity to talk about exclusions from a competitiveness, from a rate perspective for large job providers. And it is important because large industry powers rural economies. And so it's part of the balancing act of this change. It's part of the path forward, and it has to be part of the conversation.
I promise I won't jump in anymore if you let me jump in this last time. One of the things I'm proudest of and a turning point in my interest in clean energy was when Senator Senjum and I went to Germany as part of a larger delegation to study their renewable energy. And the short version of how they do it in Germany is they have a feed-in tariff that essentially allows residential ratepayers to help the large industrial users to protect those big German companies, including Mercedes, since we're talking about transportation. And I agree with you, Mike. I think that is part of the conversation. Of course, the cost will be shared. And if the public wants to see our progress on carbon reduction, we want to protect those jobs as well. I'm looking forward to those conversations.
Well, we've kept our two senators a little bit longer than we told them. Any final thoughts, senators, before you have to go?
Here, just good luck on your work, and I assume there's going to be a report someday, and we look forward to reading it.
A huge thanks to both of you.
And if you do it this session, we'll bring it to the Energy Utilities Committee and hear personally about it from you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I would say thank you, Mariah. Thanks to the Advisory Council, and thanks to our outstanding commissioners too. Bishop, Peterson, Stroman for joining us. We can do almost anything as a state if we're sailing our ships in the same direction. And those of us that are working on this in St. Paul for you are very excited about the possibilities. Let's look at the upside.
Thank you so much. Thanks, senators. We really appreciate you and appreciate you coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we move on to our next agenda item, I know that we've had a number of different sub-cabinet members on and off our meeting today as their schedules have allowed. I just wanted to take just a second to open it up. If there are any other sub-cabinet members who weren't on the list today to share some of the policy priorities that their agencies are working on, if you'd like to say hello or add anything to the conversation, you don't need to, but just opening it up for that. All right, well, we'll move on, but we're grateful that a number of our other sub-cabinet members have been able to be with us today and are with us now. So our final item for the day is a discussion led by Hilda Martinez Salgado, one of our Advisory Council members. Hilda, would you like to start that off?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I did send a presentation. I don't know if you have it or can you give me access to it? I sent it to Frank, so I don't know if we can.
Just and they're asking me if like we have a person that's able to testify. And so, yeah, just wanted to connect with you to see if you know some folks.
So, sorry, I think somebody else is talking. But Maria, can you have access to the presentation, or should I do it? I don't know.
Like
yeah, it would.
And
I can like work with that person as well.
Marco, I think
the thing that I would need to do is to.
I think Marco needs to mute.
Good.
Okay, so I guess I do. Am I controlling? No.
Frank, are you controlling?
Frank, are you advancing the slides?
Yes, just let me know when you want me to advance a slide.
Okay, yeah, can we start?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for giving me this time to discuss this important subject. I think I brought this subject to Mariah and Frank last December, and I think with this new administration, it's a subject I would like to to present to you to see if we are interested in move this topic forward. So I don't know if you can pass the next slide, Frank. Okay, so let me start with a little bit of background. As you all know, under the Paris Agreement, countries agreed to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees pre-industrial levels and to pursue efforts to 1.5. So based on that, on 2019, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change published a special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees. This report established that if we want to achieve those temperature goals established in the Paris Agreement, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. The report also shows us the devastated impacts that a half degree can have in the world ecosystems, and we have been starting to see those impacts. Also, it warns us that to avoid a more dangerous and costly consequence of climate change, we need to limit the global warmings to 1.5. So what does that mean? That means that we need to reduce emissions of CO2 by 2030 by half, and we need to be net zero emission by 2050. So what does net zero means? At a global level, reaching net zero emissions means balancing anthropogenic emissions and the removals of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. In practice, it means reaching net zero emission means reducing anthropogenic emissions to close to zero as possible, and then ramping up carbon removal from either natural solutions like restoring forests, wetlands, or soil solutions, or technological solutions like direct air capture and carbon storage. Next figure, please. The next figure shows a much clearly way to achieve net zero emissions. If we implement a conventional mitigation technique, we will be able to transition to a low carbon economy. But there eventually we will find, as we have been discussed in the last conversation, we will have emissions that are more difficult to abate. So there is when we can use carbon removal that will allow us to reach the net zero target to a given year. And the next one, please. Eventually, if the state or if we decide to move this conversation forward, there are several things that we need to consider. First of all, there has to be a legal commitment. Because by establishing a legal status, we will be able to send a long-term policy signal and drive changes in the long-term decision-making that will help us achieve that goal. Also, we are seeing, and the science have shown us that we need to do unprecedented changes on the current economy. So all the sectors of the economy and all greenhouse gases need to be considered in a net zero target. Also, together with a net zero target, we need to consider a greenhouse gas emission reduction target, because this will allow us to give us a clear view of the reduction needed, and the target won't rely that much on carbon removal. That, for example, technology removal options are very new, so we don't know exactly how much will we able to remove through them. So we will better decide to reduce by setting a greenhouse gas reduction target. Also, we should have a long-term plan, because a net zero target is as good as influencing everyday decision. And by establishing a deep decarbonization plan, we will be able to identify what are the short and midterm policies that we need to apply in order to achieve long-term goals in the institutional, in the technical, and the behavioral changes needed to achieve net zero in all targets. The next one, please. So at this point, who has set net zero targets? There are currently 23 countries that had adopted this type of targets. Most of them have set their target year to 2050. However, there are some ambitious countries like Norway and Finland that has set their target year by 2030 and 2035. All these countries have set a legal instrument that support their target. They all have include greenhouse gases and all the sectors of the economy. And they all have developed a long-term strategy that will set the path to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. Next one, please. So who else besides countries had adopted net zero targets? We can see that a considerable number of cities, state, business, universities, and investors have adopted this type of targets. Of those 23 states, 12 of them are in the US. The last states that adopted a net zero target were Michigan and Louisiana. Louisiana is worth mentioning because Louisiana is a fossil fuel state, but it's also one of the states that has been much more impacted by climate change. All these states, the 12 US states, have adopted their legal target either by executive orders or by legislative acts. Of those 12 states, California and New York have developed a deep decarbonization pathway, which has allowed them to identify which policies they need to implement in the next decade to achieve the target. And also this exercise helped California, for example, move their target year to 2045. Next, please. As we have discussed here, this new administration under Biden is really putting a lot of work on climate. They are planning to reach a net zero emission plan, a net zero emission target by 2050, with an interim target by 2025. They also have a bold plan to achieve 100% clean energy by 2035, which by incentivizing a rapid deployment of clean energy innovation across all sectors of the economy, especially in communities most impacted by climate change. They also want to make sure that that transition is just by creating jobs with good wages, benefits, and workers' protection. They are also considering investing in coal and power plant communities and work with unions to help them create new jobs and training programs for those workers working in those sectors are able to integrate in this new transition. Next, please. And lastly, I just also want to mention two studies that were done last year. These studies do a very deep analysis of how the United States can be carbon neutral by 2050. The first one is the CCAP study. It was developed by the Zero Carbon Consortium, which was integrated by more than 20 American universities. This study does a very comprehensive analysis and present a strategic plan to create a carbon neutral economy for the United States in 2050. It makes a very profound analysis showing that target it's achievable and is also politically viable because it considers a just and more equitable transition. That study is built in 4 pillars, which include energy efficiency, decarbonizing electricity, electrification of transportation and building, and carbon capture and storage. And it also includes a very detailed policy and implementation analysis for the federal, state, and local governments. And the next study is the Net Zero America, which was done by Princeton University. It also, this study outlined 5 technological pathways for the US to become carbon neutral in 2050. This study quantifies the structure that needs to be built and also the required investment in order to run the country without emitting any more greenhouse gas than those that are removed from the atmosphere in a certain year. It also, this study analyzed the jobs and health implication of doing this transition and achieving this target. And it also includes a very detailed state level analysis of the impacts of this transition at the state level. The next one. So For me, this discussion, I think this is the right time to bring this discussion to the table, because with Biden being so pro-climate and trying to establish a neutrality goal for the country, makes it for the state to evaluate this decision. I see that the legislative and the Senate have present their bills and what are their goals, and I see that there's interest in moving things forward. So I just want to open the discussion to see if it's feasible, if it's something that we as advisory council wants to move it forward. I think this is the right moment to do so, but I just want to open the discussion about the subject.
Great. So we just have a few minutes left. Thank you, Hilda. And let's start the conversation. Who has some thoughts or questions in response to Hilda's presentation? While folks are thinking, I know it's been a lot of information in this meeting, so thank you to everyone for your attention and your energy. And we can always circle back to this topic as well. And I just want to thank both Anne and Hilda for bringing forward ideas to share at the meetings, and really encourage all of you to reach out to myself and Frank and Katie and Craig with your thoughts and ideas about how you want to spend this time together. We really want to build on what you're interested in and your strengths. So thank you, and encourage the rest of you to reach out as well. Any other thoughts on Hilda's presentation or questions, things you're thinking about? Well, we will get Hilda's presentation out to everyone. All the meeting materials that we use, we'll make sure that we always circulate and post those. And we'll circle back on this presentation when folks have had a little bit of time to think through it more. Yeah.
So this is Laura Bishop, and I'll just weigh in and just say a huge thank you, Hilda, for bringing that forward. And I think, the piece that I think we've talked a little bit around that today, both on the legislative pieces as well as the current goals that are there, and certainly with Representative Acom looking at a bill that would change the goals in the Next Generation Energy Act, and whether it's setting the new goal, which again, I'm going to leave open to this group to have a discussion about that and what that means, or getting us a more measured, longer term strategy that gets us to that goal, or even gets us to the goal that's set in the statute that we're not able to get to at this point. I think we all are aligned that we absolutely need to focus on moving forward, and we're not right now. So appreciate all that you did, and yes, if not now, then when and who. So we're a good group and with great minds to bring us together to do this. So very much appreciate all of you. What a good meeting, you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, you all have our next meeting on the calendar. It's March 29th from 1 to 4. And you'll be hearing from our staff team in between about setting up some of the groups to work on how we build support for climate action, connecting you with action teams, and some of the other follow-up items for today. I'm sure we'll be reaching out to ask you to help us think through what those groups should look like and how we should get started. So you'll hear from us between now and March 29th. Any other final questions or comments from advisory council members or thoughts? Commissioner Bishop, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure. I think I kind of did just a few minutes ago. So I just want to say a sincere thank you. And I really look forward to these continued conversations. I really appreciate everyone that had input into the agenda today. I know that it was great to have the legislators come on and kind of hear those differing perspectives and have them kind of all in one place. And when we asked, they didn't hesitate. They wanted to come and talk to this group. So just know that as they look at you as a very influential group of both practitioners and thought leaders in this space, that we will continue to work with those legislators to advocate our positions, and look forward to having all of you help us in those efforts and bring forward those views. So thank you. And great conversation, and I look forward to talking with all of you in the interim period of time, and certainly you can reach out to me at any time, and then of course we will see each other again live on this at the end of March. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Mm-hmm.